Welcome back to the Fennel Shed, and we're getting to the really exciting stage with this quilt because we've got the centerpiece hopefully all put together, and now we're adding the half blocks that create this lovely frame. So today we're here to work on part 8, and part 8 has a left hand and a right hand. It's made up of half square triangles. We've done half square triangles a few different ways. Today I have a new way to show you how to do them in sets of 12, which works perfectly for this. And then how to make sure that you don't get mixed up with the lefts and the rights. Follow the pattern and that'll keep you right. But you can see how this creates this visual line that leads your eye to what will be in the corner. And then again down to the completion of where our log cabin was. So the only gaps, once you have these pieces done, the only gaps left then to fill will be part 9, which will be another set of 8 half blocks that goes into this space. And then finally in June, part 10, which will be 4 6-inch quarter blocks that will fill the corners, and then we're on the home straight. So now you can see more clearly, these are our pairs of half blocks, in that they're half the size of the full blocks as the full blocks are in the quilt. So they're 6 inches by 12 inches to become part of the border. And it's much easier for you to see now how there is a left hand and a right hand, and you need to pay attention to that, because you would think, oh, we just have to turn those the other way up. But if you turn them the other way up, it isn't correct. So keep an eye on your left hand and your right hand as you're working through this. So to make each of these, we need 12 of our fabric number 8 in half square triangles and 12 of our fabric number 5 in half square triangles, both of them combined with our background fabric. And then the central band is fabric number 2, because it isn't part of a major statement. It has a little bit of contrast, but it's not making a big statement. It's this sawtooth step ladder of colour that leads the eye along the frame of the quilt that we want to achieve. So how do we make all these half square triangles in an even easier way than we have done in the past? So by pure good luck, I was working recently at a workshop, and a lady had a quilt that required over 500 half square triangles. And she had this method where there was a template printed on paper. And I had seen this method before, but I hadn't really taken it seriously. And I kind of thought it was a gimmick. But because she had hundreds and hundreds to do, we thought, let's give it a go and see how it works. And it works extremely well. And the beauty of it is that every time that you do this, you create 12 half square triangles. And that's exactly what you need for each pair of half blocks. You need 12 matching half square triangles. So it eliminates an awful lot of waste. It eliminates an awful lot of cutting. And the stage that it eliminates that really pleased me was that once the half square triangles are made, they're made perfectly. They are exactly the right size, and they don't need to be trimmed. And those of you that have been on this journey with me, we've talked so many times that we have to get so far and then we have to stop and trim. The beauty of this is that we don't need to trim. So let me show you how it works. To create a set of 12 half square triangles, you need 2 pieces of your fabric, a piece of your background fabric and a piece of the contrast. And I cut these very roughly 6 1/4 by 9 1/4. You can go slightly bigger, but that's the size, that's the size that you need to safely allow you to do this. And then in your pack with your pattern, I will send you 12 of these. That's what, no, not 12. I'll send you 9. You need 8. I'll send you all that you need, plus an extra one, so that you can keep that on record, that should you want to do this again, you can photocopy it to your heart's content. But you will not need access to a photocopier to be able to start sewing. You will have enough of these paper sheets in your pack to allow you to sew all that you need to sew. In addition, these I have photocopied from my friends, but the version that you'll get will have 2 crucial differences from this piece of paper that I'm showing you here. One is that it'll be color coded, so the lines for cutting, the lines for sewing, and the lines for cutting the outer cuts will all have different colors so that you'll know where you're going. And also they'll have printed instructions on them, so that as you work on it, you'll be able to read the instructions, and that'll keep you right, save any confusion. So a pair of fabrics, your background fabric plus the contrast, and onto that you pin this piece of paper, this magic piece of paper, and you pin it on. I've already pressed the two pieces of fabric, so I know they're right sides facing and they're happy together. And then you pin at least top and bottom, and if you like, side by side as well, to keep those where you want them to be. And once you have those securely pinned together, you take them to the sewing machine. So I'm going to sew where you will be sewing. And the difference when you get your paper is that these will be red lines, so you need to remember you sew on the red lines and you cut through the black lines. And I won't talk when I'm sewing because the sewing machine is too noisy, but you can sew all the way down here, across to here, back and up, like in a continuous line that ends up back at the opposite corner, and then you start again and do the reverse. So it's only 2 stop-start pieces of sewing that you do. So here I go, keep an eye as I go. Now before I begin, I want to tell you that for best results, use a smaller stitch, because you're going to be subcutting these at every junction, and you want the opportunity for your seams to rip to be minimized. So the smaller your stitch is, the better chance they have of surviving on to the next stage. And then you carefully sew on all the red lines. Now one change that I made is that every time I know I'm at a junction, which will be the end of my seam, I do a tiny little double stitch, but that's optional. Now I've got one circuit completed, and I'm going to switch over onto the other red line here. And sew the second circuit. And that's the sewing part done, and what we've just done there is enough to create a set of 12 half square triangles. So I think that's fairly neat. Come with me now and I'll show you how to cut them. So now I've got the seams done, the cross seams on my half square triangles. We remove the pins from this paper, and you cut now through all the black lines. And I have an old cutter, it's a very dodgy cutter, but because I'm cutting through paper, I'm using this. But I really don't think the paper on my rotary cutting blade has as bad an effect as paper on your scissors. I could be wrong, but I haven't noticed it having any really I haven't noticed cutting paper doing any really bad damage to my blade. So that's the sides, and I do keep a pair of paper or aptly, you know, the scissors that you use for cutting out paper and things like that. And then we turn these around, and again carefully, and the paper gives you such accuracy. There's no guessing here. It literally is a clean, crisp line. And if you've got an old board, or if you have, you know, the centimeters on the other side of your board, you can turn your board over. You're not depending on the measurements or on the ruler or the board to keep you right, because the paper is doing all of that for you. There we have 6 pairs of half square triangles. And at this stage, I stack all these up and I work my way through doing 8 sets of those. 4 sets of fabric number 5, 4 sets with fabric number 8. And then you're left with quite a sizable little stack of these. And this is the kind of thing that I do in the evening when there's something silly on the TV, or sitting having a cup of coffee, or sitting in the garden. You can do this anywhere. And our next stage is to cut away the corners, and those will be your green lines, the little squares at the corners. This has the same effect as trimming away the ears on your finished half square triangles, but doing it this way, you're getting it done in advance, and it's really very, very clean result. So I tried going snip, snip in from one side and in from the other, and there was always a little thread in the middle. So I found that I got better results by going into the corner and then cutting from the corner out again, because you can go a little bit further there because that's within your seam allowance. Now, the next thing, you need to tear the paper away. So tearing the paper away, again, the first time I tried it, I tried to start up here at the point. And as I was tearing the paper, I was undoing some of my stitches. So I found the best results for me were to fold my paper back and give it a good score with my thumbnails to weaken the paper. And then to tear in from the edge like this. And then it just breaks off all the way to the point, rather than trying to start at the point, because starting at the point weakens your seams. So a bit like ironing, it's a kind of a 3-stage process. Fold the paper back and score it to weaken it along that line, and then tear it in, and then finally pull away and pull all those bits of paper. And the best way is to have a waste paper basket at your feet, and then you'll find that this little piece in the middle just lifts out and peels away. And you're left with this lovely shape, and you can cut through that with your scissors, or if you prefer, you can use your cutter, but the results are quite magical. You have your half square triangles, trimmed, squared, and perfect. So I hope that you like that technique. If you don't, you can always refer back to one of the previous parts in the pattern, and I will give you the sizes to subcut these to make them in the way that we've been making them previous to this. But I know I'm a convert to this paper pattern method, and I'm going to write that up for all sizes of half square triangles on accurately sized graph paper, because it's so clean, it cuts down on waste, and it really helps. I have a bad arm and shoulder from cutting too much, cuts down on all that trimming business, which is very, very sore on the arms, the shoulders, the blade, the board, everything. So we have our sets of half square triangles. As it says in the pattern, every time that you put a pair of rectangles of your background fabric and your feature fabric together, you create 12 half square triangles. 12 half square triangles allows you to make a left-hand side and a right-hand side, and the left-hand side goes there and the right-hand side goes there. And then the same, you repeat that using your fabric number 5, and that's a left and a right. And now follow the diagrams and the photographs in the pattern so that you get a left and a right. You don't want to have all rights or all lefts, and you want to get this lovely zigzag effect, and follow that very closely. I found the best way for me was to establish the direction, like here, that's my direction, and just sew the first 2 together. So that would be taking these 2, sticking a pin in the seam that I want to sew, because once you take those to your sewing machine, if you get distracted, you could sew that line, you could sew that line, you could sew that line, but in fact the line that you want to sew is this one. So when I'm in doubt, I always stick a pin in, and I leave the pin pointing towards the seam that I want to sew. That way, if I'm called away or if I have to leave it for a week or a month before I get back to it, the pin will tell me what I was about to sew. Then if you're sewing this pair, you sew from this corner to this corner so that your seam here is folded in the same direction as you're sewing, and it also will be on the back. That way you minimize the chance of you having these flip over seams that are so horrible when you come to iron. So then when you have them done in pairs, you can carry on then and sew another pair and another pair, or you can add 3, 4, 5, 6 using this as your guide. Either way, you'll end up with rows of 6 going left and rows of 6 going left and going right, to remember that the camera is the other way around, and you'll be able then to make your blocks. So the middle line, and again these are, oh, a little note for those of you that are doing this on your own with your own fabrics, if I can find the piece, I can't, but the piece that will be your midline piece, you cut a section which is selvage at the side, 12.5 inches top to bottom by the half width of fabric. That's the width that you would find in a fat quarter, which is from the selvage to the mid fold. Press that and then cut 8 slices, 2.5 inches wide, and that will give you 8 of these that you need to go in to the middle of these half blocks. And once you sew 1, 2, 3 together, you have the sections that you need. So as we saw at the start, you make 4 pairs, 4 lefts, and 4 rights, and you're ready to put part 8 in place in the frame of your quilt.